Okay, can the Penrith Panthers win 3 NRL Premierships in a row? Can they do it? Can they do what the Sydney Roosters failed to do in 2020, win that third consecutive grand final? Can they do it? Well, what is noticeable, I'm going to use the Sydney Roosters as a comparison, is how very quickly they dropped off. Very, very quickly were they not the side they were in the previous 2 seasons. You've got to think of all the extra games played. Yes, they won 3 grand finals in 6 years, and only once missed the final 8 in that time. So they were a very consistent side for over half a decade. But it is very noticeable how they have declined as a team, have the Roosters. Now, they're still making the top 8. They're not making the top 4. And the last 2 seasons has been really stark in how far they've dropped back. And yes, they've had players forced to retire because of injury. They've lost key leaders in their leadership group in Boyd Cordner, Jake Friend and the Morris twins. Mitch Orbison retired. And they haven't adequately replaced those players. Which has been very, very noticeable. And injuries, the depth of that squad has been massively tested. Massively. Billy Smith has missed most of the last 3 seasons. Verrills has moved on. Luke Keary hasn't been playing all the time. So Hutchinson has had a bigger role than anticipated. He's really had to step in as a utility. And they've had to rush Suoliti into first grade, I think, a year or 2 before he's truly ready. And he is a superstar player in the making. Had a great World Cup, but they've had to rush him in sooner than I think they were planning to in the process. On the Penrith side of things, yes, they lost the World Club Challenge. Yes, there is a one-off game. If they were to play that game 10 times, I think Penrith win it 7, 8 times out of 10. St Helens did prepare very well, and the weather conditions, I think, suited the English side over the Australian side, where it was a bit cooler. The thunderstorm came in, heavy rain, pretty much northern English conditions in March and February time. It was the perfect conditions for St Helens. It's what northerners in this country are brought up on, is really crap weather. And it suited the English style of rugby league. And St Helens adapted to the conditions better handling, more dominant, won the contact area, played the ball. But there's another thing. St Helens have won 4 in a row over here in the Super League. 4 in a row. That's 4 consecutive grand finals they've won. Out of the team that won the grand final of the Super League last year, only 1 player was absent. The other 17 out of the 18-man squad played or were part of that squad for the grand final last year. In Penrith's case, out of the 18 players, including the 5 interchanges, only 11 were carryovers from last year. Yes, they got players injured, but some key players have moved on. 3 players from that grand final squad are now playing for different teams. Charlie Staines and Coruscant have gone to the West Tigers, and Viliami Kikau has gone to the Bulldogs. And it was very noticeable, especially with Coruscant and Kikau not being there, that go forward to play the ball. And Charlie Staines with his returns because of his pace. He's not as integral in the outside backs as, let's say, Crichton, who will be leaving at the end of this season, or Brian Toto, for example. But Charlie Staines, while he'd fallen down the pecking order as a winger fullback, he has got some electrifying pace, and his tries per game ratio is ridiculous. It had tailed off towards the end of his time as a Panther, but he has pace. And that was something they were lacking in some of their ball movement and some of their one-on-ones, was that bit of that pace. And it was very noticeable in the World Club Challenge yesterday. I watched the full match replay just before I'm doing this video on the NRL YouTube channel. What was very noticeable, how clunky the Panthers were. Their combinations weren't as good, and that spine. Yes, they've got players out injured and players that have moved on. It was very clunky. Luai was shackled very successfully by St Helens. Cleary was put under a lot of pressure. And while Cleary won the World Cup and Luai was in the final, and they both had decent tournaments, they weren't at their best. I think Luai was better for Samoa than he has been for Penrith tonight. Cleary did not have the best World Cup. His goal kicking wasn't great. His kicking from hand wasn't great. He didn't have an outstanding tournament. He was part of a winning team, but it wasn't an outstanding tournament by any means. But you've also got to look at the fact that Penrith have played a lot of extra games over other teams. And that extra amount of rugby league is starting to take a toll. Now, they've also had some player turnover and they've got some players injured. And as I say, look at the Sydney Roosters, how much of a drop-off the Roosters have had and how they've declined from being a top 4 team to a top 8 team, and they just made the 8 last season. And looking at the pre-season matches, the pre-season challenge matches, I haven't been sold on their depth. And I think Penrith, while they've got a production on talent, and their youth policy and their youth development is fantastic, possibly one of the best youth policies in any sport, not only just rugby league, but identifying that talent and fast-tracking that talent. And bringing talent through in batches. It's not just one or two players who are like, you're decent. It's a whole bloody team of players. They can, in reality, they can call up their Jersey flag and all that to the next level above. They could call up their New South Wales Cup team. A lot of them could quite easily be squad players in the NRL. So it's not just one or two players from each age group or each team level and grade level. It's whole teams they're bringing through as units, which then stay together and win together. So they've got a good production line. However, they do look a little bit clunky, and they look a bit lethargic, and that is a bit troubling. They didn't look dominant, and they were dominated. Now, out of the 11 games they've lost in 3 years, 7 of them they were held to nil at half time. So if you can hold them to nil at half time, you've got just under a 70% chance of winning that game. Now, for me, they are still the favourites. They are still the top dogs in Australia. But I think there's been some warning signs with this dominant spell that Penrith have had that they are vulnerable. And I think Parramatta exposed it over the last couple of years in the regular season. And in 2021 in the final series, Parramatta pushed them in possibly, in my opinion, one of the most intense games that was almost Origin-esque for the whole 80 minutes, losing just by 2 points, in similar conditions to what the World Cup Challenge was played in. And they have shown some vulnerabilities. They're not truly invincible. And I do think they're going to be a little bit more vulnerable this season than in previous seasons because I don't think they've fully replaced Coruscant and Kickout. Now, it's going to take some time for their new signings to bed in, and those players that they're bringing up from reserve grade and from the extended squad into the 30-man elite squad. It's going to take a little bit of time for the newer faces and those lesser players who've had lesser game time to gel with the spine and with the core of the team. Those players who are out injured or who've been rested to allow recuperation following a very shortened off-season following the World Cup. When they are back at full strength, they're still going to be, I think, on paper, possibly the best team. But I think the gap has closed, and could this be a down season for them? Or could it be they continue to defy the odds and do 3 in a row? Or do they do a Sydney Roosters and they just fall off a cliff? Because I think the Roosters may miss the 8 this year, for example. Could they do a Sydney Roosters and then start declining rapidly for a couple of seasons? I still think they're going to make the top 4. I don't think Penrith are going to be as dominant as they have been in the last 3 years in the regular season, or for that matter, post-season. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please place your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll have some more content for you very, very soon.